Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:06 now. News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Congressman Matt Rosendale joins us. We'll get the latest from inside of that chaotic Congress, that new border bill being released last night, and it's a doozy. Andrew Arthur joins us at 4:30 from the Center for Immigration Studies with an in-depth policy analysis. And Mark Morgan at 5:30, a man who was a part of the mission to keep illegals out of our country, will join us with his thoughts, and you can talk to us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Yeah, just call it the Immigration Reduction Act already. How about that? Because it doesn't actually do anything to stop illegal migration into the United States. It only normalizes that. And principally, it's not even really an immigration bill, although, of course, it causes more damage. It's principally a Ukraine border bill. $60 billion allocated for Ukraine's border, just $20 billion allocated for accelerating people across ours. That's what's actually in this thing, in a massive, massive package. $118.3 billion price tag on this thing. And right away, the people who put it together in secret and are only giving us until Wednesday to even consider it, because Chuck Schumer wants to sprint a vote on this bill this week, beginning on Wednesday. They got out there and tried to sell this thing right away. James Langford was over on Fox this morning. Chuck Schumer ran to MSNBC, and they tried to convince the audiences of those respective networks that this thing's actually great for you. Chuck Schumer did it in a weird way. He threatened to have your sons killed in Eastern Europe unless you support allowing more illegals to pour into our country. Take a listen.
You've said that you worked very closely with Leader McConnell on this bill. Now that we see what's in it, seems to be as bipartisan as it gets.
If Mika is for it, I'm against it.
Why wouldn't both sides really want this to go through?
Well, it's a great question, Mika. Look, it took a long time, 4 months of arduous negotiations. They fell off the tracks a whole bunch of times. I had to be on the phone even at midnight.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Saying we've got to keep going. Why? We're at a turning point in America. This bill is crucial, and history will look back on it and say, did America fail itself?
If Donald Trump wins, what recourse do we have? How do we lock in permanent Democrat majorities going into the future if we don't give citizenship to every illegal foreign national we possibly can?
Why is it crucial? Well, if we don't aid Ukraine, Putin will walk all over Ukraine. We will lose the war, and we could be fighting in Eastern Europe and a NATO ally in a few years. Americans won't like that.
Notice a couple things about what he just said. One, his priority is not to talk about America's borders. He said the very first consideration he has, the thing that's the most important, is making sure Ukraine gets at least $60 billion more from us. That's priority one. Two, he says we may lose the war. Did you hear that phrasing? We may lose. Now, I thought this was a war between Ukraine and Russia. Now, Chuck Schumer says that it's us. We may lose.
Point in America. This bill is crucial, and history will look back on it and say, did America fail itself? Why is it crucial? Well, if we don't aid Ukraine, Putin will walk all over Ukraine. We will lose the war.
We will lose the war. So, in other words, this is our war. We're fighting this.
And we could be fighting in Eastern Europe and a NATO ally in a few years. Americans won't like that.
And your boys and transgender girls will be dying in Eastern Europe if you don't pass this. That's Chuck Schumer today. And now more. Now, all of a sudden, Democrats, for the first time in the entire Biden presidency, it says the border is in chaos.
The border, everyone has said it's chaos. A speaker, you just saw Speaker Johnson. He said it's chaos. We have to do something legislative a few months ago. But what?
Yeah, and they did pass it. They passed a bill called H.R. 2. It mandates nationwide e-verify. It clamps down on all of the illegal immigration. It forces the president's hand. It's a great piece of legislation. They already passed it.
This happened, and answer your question. So this is crucial for America. It's a turning point. History is going to look over our shoulders and say, did we rise to the occasion? To his credit, Mitch McConnell did. But too many Republicans, including Speaker Johnson, are just scared to death of Donald Trump. Donald Trump has said he wants chaos. Donald Trump has said, well, wait till I become president. That'll take at least a year. Ukraine could be gone. The border will get much worse. War in the Middle East will get worse, maybe bringing us into it. He's doing it all for political reasons.
So those are a bunch of lies, including the idea that Trump wants chaos. Trump does not want chaos. Democrats have delivered chaos. Trump wants peace. Trump wants resolution. Trump wants sovereignty. And this is why people want Trump. It's why they wanted him in 2016, and it's why they want him again. That's the truth. They don't want this anymore. They're done with the chaos. And the reality about this bill is it's an unmitigated disaster. Now, there are a bunch of places you could possibly turn today, but I'm glad you turned here. I want to go over some of the details. Senator Mike Lee has been, I would say, practically heroic in his presentation of all of the badness in this bill. He has been really upset with this idea that they would present it and then sprint consideration of it and jam it through the Senate in just 2 days. When he last expressed that, it was last week. We thought the bill might come out Friday night. It did not. They didn't even release it Friday. They released it yesterday, and now they still want a Wednesday vote on this thing. But Mike Lee sat down and he read all 300-plus pages. His staff did, and here's what they concluded. A bunch of things that are important here. One, despite what you're hearing in the press, this is me talking, not quoting here, despite what you're hearing in the press about this ending so-called catch and release, that is catching an illegal and then releasing him into the United States, it doesn't end it. It codifies catch and release. Once again, a game of opposite world. It's gaslighting. Mike Lee says it codifies catch and release. It gives the Secretary of Homeland Security, that would be Mayorkas, the man who deserves to be impeached, unchecked authority to release an alien into the United States under ineffective alternatives to detention. The illegals only have to express, quote, credible fear of persecution or the intent to apply for protection determination. So it codifies releasing illegals into our country. It also allows up to 1.8 million illegal aliens to enter before temporarily closing parts of the border. It's not a border lockdown. They don't shut the border after we reach the 1.8 million pace. No, they give some power to Mayorkas to possibly shut down some portions of the border. Do you see all the heavy qualifications that are built into that? It is not what they were saying it was. It was bad enough when we were told, oh, it's 5,000 a day, and if we get past that, then we shut down the border. No, they don't. They do not shut down the border. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut has been saying over and over, Democrat, we are not closing the border. This bill does not close the border. He's trying to placate the left, of course, who supports the invasion. But that is a revelation. That is a detail, an important one. Mike Lee writes, the Secretary of Homeland Security is only required to shut down the border if there are 5,000 average illegal crossings over a consecutive 7-day period or 8,500 in a single day. You've got to get past 8,500 crossings in a single day. Remember, Jay Johnson said 1,000 a day was a crisis. Mike Lee continues, the Secretary may shut down the border if crossings are at 4,000 daily average over a consecutive 7-day period, even during a border emergency. This bill requires the administration to process a minimum of 1,400 illegal immigrants a day, even during the so-called closure. Lee says this is 400 more per day than Obama's DHS Secretary Jay Johnson said constituted a crisis in 2019. Okay, Mike Lee's correct. Jay Johnson said 1,000 was a crisis. Loopholes. This bill does not count any unaccompanied alien children from non-contiguous countries, suspected trafficking victims, aliens who are determined exempted, that is, based on decisions by ICE, or aliens who meet screening criteria for asylum. It also allows the reopening of the border once encounters are at 75% of the number that caused the shutdown. So if the number was 10,000 per day, it only has to be reduced to 7,500 per day to reopen. Does that sound like the world you want to live in? Where the United States is being invaded to the tune of 7,500 people a day? No, of course not. Limited duration. It limits the number of days each year where authority to shut down the border can be in place. 270 days in the first calendar year, 225 in the second, 180 days in the third year. The period that this border shutdown is mandatory decreases. In year one, the first 90 days are mandatory. In year two, the first 75. And in year three, only the first 60. are mandatory. Okay, so this is interesting. So this is not some sort of permanent change to our immigration system in that sense. It's going to sunset after 3 years, just in time for the next presidential election. So do you see what's happening? They're allowing more and more illegals to come into the country with each passing year over the next 4 years. Elon Musk has been going absolutely crazy about this today. He keeps pointing out what we've been saying for a long time here, which is Democrats are so dissatisfied with the current American electorate, they're desperately trying to import a new one. They hate the voters. They have contempt for them. They're scared to death that Biden is polling, by NBC's polls right now, way behind Donald Trump. Donald Trump has the biggest lead that NBC has ever detected among American voters. But Democrats have this undying passion for power that includes replacing those voters. They write about it extensively. They've been bragging about it for years. They were really hoping that Texas, based on racial standards, would change into a blue state. It didn't happen. So now, dissatisfied with that, they're importing people from hundreds of countries around the world and are aiming on giving them so-called pathways to citizenship, which, of course, is not just so-called, but genuinely, in the end, a way to make illegal foreign nationals citizens of the United States. Let me break away from the Mike Lee stuff for a moment. I'll just quote for you from the New York Times. Bill offers pathway to citizenship for hundreds of thousands. More visas and pathways to citizenship. Though the border deal is not comprehensive immigration reform, there are a few provisions in it that are designed to alleviate immigration backlogs by awarding visas that could put certain migrants on a pathway to citizenship. The bill would create 250,000 green card eligible family and employment-based visas that would be parceled out over 5 years. The bill also would ensure that the children of immigrants who come to the United States on H-1B visas, which go to highly skilled foreign workers, would not be rendered ineligible for green cards when they become adults. So H-1B employees, these are brought in by big corporations to replace American workers. Their children would then also be put on a pathway to citizenship. So this is what is in this bill, to the extent that it deals with immigration at all. Remember, most of it is a Ukraine package. It's a $60 billion Ukraine spending bill. So that's what we're dealing with. Let's see here. Presidential discretion. The bill allows the president to reopen the border anytime that it is in the so-called national interest to temporarily suspend the Border Emergency Authority. So even if Mayorkas is like, well, we really got to clamp down on this border, it's getting out of control. It's well above 5,000 a day on average. If Biden was like, nope, if he just refused, it just goes right back to what it was. Why are we giving this guy power? He already has power to shut down the border, and he has forcibly opened it. They're literally cutting through border barriers that Texas is arranging in order to stop people from getting in. Why are we giving them more power? And here's the biggest doozy in terms of power. Do you know what court gets to take over all of the immigration disputes in the United States if this bill were to become law? D.C. That's right. You would concentrate all of this power into the D.C. Federal Appeals Court, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The bill, quoting from Breitbart today, the bill also blocks lawsuit pushbacks by placing all judicial oversight over the migration system in the progressive-dominated D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. The shift would largely prevent state and local officials or American citizens from trying to protect Republican goals and civic priorities from the Democrats' migration expansion law. D.C. would allow the super left-wing D.C. court to handle all of these immigration disputes. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is throwing a warning flag on this today. He says that this will destroy our country. That's his language. In addition to encouraging nearly 2 million illegal aliens annually to enter the country, paying out over $1 billion to the toxic NGOs, more on that in a moment, that settle illegal immigrants all over the nation, empowering Mayorkas to abuse the asylum process on his arbitrary whim, and ending catch and release. This bill, I think he got that wrong. That's not right. It actually codifies catch and release. This bill that gives Biden and Mayorkas everything they want does something far more sinister. It requires that legal challenges to these provisions be heard by the highly partisan Washington, D.C. courts. They know exactly what they are doing. Texas has been able to create major slowdowns to Biden's open borders doctrine because our constitutional system allows us to sue the federal government in fair venues. What Biden, Mayorkas, and the Senate uniparty in the swamp want to do is prevent the Texas Attorney General and all other state AGs from acting as a check on the federal government's tyrannical abuses of power. That is unthinkable, says Ken Paxton. It is un-American. This bill is an unacceptable mess that no serious leader could even think about passing. Unfortunately, despite the short window here for people to read this bill, there are lots of people who are reading it. And opposition to this dumpster fire is growing rapidly, not just in the House, where Speaker Mike Johnson has promised it's dead on arrival, but inside of the United States Senate, where it seems with each passing hour we get another Republican who's coming out and saying they are opposed to
WMAL, more than just politics, because laughter is the best medicine. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
All right, let's go to the phones. I've got Kevin calling in from Manassas now, line one. Kevin, you're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Vince, I hope you don't mind, but I am fired up today.
Don't mind at all.
You know, we all know Joe Biden's got millions from Ukraine, and the politicians are corrupt and they're selling out the American people left and right. But, you know, the bottom line is this. Why is it Mitch McConnell and these 10 Benedict Arnolds in the Republican Party that voted for this dumpster fire standing at the podium and saying the president has all the authority during current law to stop what's going on at the border? This is nothing more than a Ukraine bill as masquerading as a border bill. You know, I call on now any investigative reporter or any attorney general in a Republican state to immediately start investigating Mitch McConnell, Langford, and these Republicans and their families and find out which no-show million-dollar-a-year jobs are their wives or brothers or sons getting, because this is all this is. They are selling out the American citizen, the taxpayer, and you're stealing our American dream. And we're tired of it, and we're sick of it.
Amen. Thank you, Kevin. You know, I had the same thought. I was going over this bill this morning, looking through all the details of it, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, who had the biggest hand in writing this thing? Who was actually responsible? If you could give truth serum to Langford and get him to actually spill his guts on this, like, who really was controlling the destiny of this legislation? Please do go into detail. We'd love to hear you explain that, because it's a disaster. And Kevin's right. This is a Ukraine funding bill, principally. Imagine the temerity you would have to wield, how brazen it is for them to say that this is somehow a fix to our immigration system, when in fact it makes our immigration system worse. It codifies the chaos, and it gives way more money to Ukraine's border than it does to ours. Yet another insult atop the injury that the American public keeps suffering. Maybe that's because they don't really care about us in the long term. Go find somebody else. Andrew Arthur is going to join us from the Center for Immigration Studies coming up in the next hour. Congressman Matt Rosendale is just minutes away. Hey, good afternoon to you. 3:36 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we are making sense of the news. Coming up, Andrew Arthur from the Center for Immigration Studies is here at 4:30. We'll talk to him about the wonky details of this awful Ukraine spending bill that throws open our gates. And Mark Morgan is here at 5:30, former acting commissioner of U.S. Customs and Border Protection for the Trump administration. You can join us at 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Joining us now is Congressman Matt Rosendale. He represents Montana's 2nd Congressional District, and he's on the phone. Congressman, good to talk to you, sir.
Vince, it's great to be on with you again.
Was this bill everything you hoped for and more?
Oh, my gosh. Homeland Security Secretary Alejandra Mayorkas, who is currently getting ready to be impeached, okay, came out and said, this is a good piece of legislation. That should tell everybody everything that they need to know about this legislation.
Yes. I got the impression that he was involved in drafting it, actually, because he did an interview, I think it was the New York Times last week, and he was talking about some of the behind-the-scenes negotiating going on. And my understanding was he was a part of it. Were you a part of it, Congressman?
No, no. And if he wasn't, I think the drug cartels themselves must have been, because this is absolutely insane. They want to put into statute, Vince, a minimal, somewhere 4,000 to 5,000, depending upon exactly how you're going to measure this, but 4,000 to 5,000 illegals a day allowed into our country before triggers start keeping Homeland Security, CBP, from being able to utilize their powers to keep folks out. That's just one of the provisions. It's going to expand visas by about 60,000 a year. It's going to expand, listen to this one. We had 100,000 illegals, refugees coming from Afghanistan, okay, 2 years ago. Mm-hmm. They were distributed across 3 military bases. They were granted parolee status. They were not vetted. Somewhere along the line, these people have been released into our country. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they are. But this piece of legislation would grant them an additional 10,000 visas to bring family members in. So if we've got people that are here that are already looking to do harm to our country, why don't we just go ahead and let them invite their family members in to see if they can help out? The contents of this legislation are absolutely crazy. It's terrible, and I'm glad to see that leadership in the House has said this will never be brought to the floor.
Yeah, and rightfully so. But I do think it's worth dwelling on some of the wish list items that the left and certainly the Republicans who are going along with them are pursuing. So one thing that a bunch stands out to me, but one is that it would concentrate all of the legal disputes involving illegal immigrants in the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. It would take away the power of all the other federal courts and vest it into the D.C. Circuit Court, which is like a very left-wing and destructive court. This seems to me like a very obvious way to try and undermine immigration enforcement in a future Trump administration, sir.
That's exactly what all of this is about, okay? Now, not the spending provision. So they're trying to get an additional $60 billion for Ukraine. They're trying to sprinkle that throughout this, but you are right. They're trying to put some provisions in statute that are going to keep the next Trump administration, which I think we all can agree is going to be taking place, so that his hands end up being tied. They saw what he was able to do to stop this invasion on our southern border, and they're trying to put additional provisions back into statute that would keep him from sealing our border up again.
Another piece is that apparently the bill makes it so that DHS officials, bureaucrats, will be able to render judgments about who gets asylum and who doesn't without going through the immigration court at all. J.D. Vance points this out today and says that it's, quote, perhaps the worst provision of the bill.
I agree. And then you turn over additional authorities to Secretary of Homeland Security, again, Mayorkas, who's currently going through this impeachment process to make determinations about when we're going to have to implement this increased security, grants him an additional access to somewhere between $350, I think, and $450 million of funds that he would have the ability to direct around. Meanwhile, it was going to spend about, $900 million, not on securing our border, Vince, but on building shelters at the southern border. And all that is going to do is incentivize even more people to come to the border. I'm telling you, the cartels must have had a hand in this. And this demonstrates Chuck Schumer came out, and Mitch McConnell came out. They rolled this thing. Mitch McConnell says he has never worked so closely with Chuck Schumer to pass legislation. So this is the time for the Senate to ask themselves, is Mitch McConnell truly able to be the leader of the Republican conference in the United States Senate?
So,
time for a change.
Some of these Republicans, whether it's Langford or Romney or Mike Rounds, these Republican senators, over the past week, they've been pushing this bill, and they've been angry that anybody's been critical of them without you haven't even seen the bill. How can you be critical? And, of course, well, why didn't you release the text until the last minute again? But the defenses that they're mustering include blaming Trump. They say that Trump wants the chaos to continue. That Mitt Romney made it pretty clear that he thinks Trump is just doing this because he likes the politics of it and doesn't want the crisis solved until after the election. This is wild to hear from these Republicans. Do you get the sense that they would rather have a Biden presidency?
Oh, I have said many times over, okay, that Mitch McConnell doesn't care whether he's the majority leader or the minority leader. He just wants to be the leader of the Republicans. However many of them there are in the United States Senate, he just wants to be able to have that power. And then that is the definition, my friend, of the uniparty. You've got Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell working together. They don't care which one has the majority leader title. They don't care which one has the minority leader title. As long as it's those two guys at the top of the food chain trying to control everything that happens in that chamber. We've got to make changes. Mitch McConnell needs to be replaced.
Right, but when it comes to Trump, he has expectations, and Mitch McConnell doesn't meet them. Trump expresses his dissatisfaction and drives McConnell crazy. Seems like McConnell gets along great with Biden.
Right, and so if you're going to hope to have a Trump administration that is as effective as possible, okay, that we can continue to pursue the policies that we saw under the last Trump administration, Mitch has got to go. He's Mitch McConnell, and anyone that he brings in, make sure we're real clear on that. Him and anyone that he brings in, his yes people are not going to support the Trump agenda.
Yeah, it's a big problem. So I take it, based on all of this, that you're not going to be going to Mitch McConnell for money for your Senate campaign, right?
I think Mitch McConnell decided several years ago that Matt Rosendale is not the kind of guy that he wants to see in the United States Senate. I spent last weekend traveling around the state with Matt Gaetz, and we did a bunch of events. Every single event we had was oversold, okay, shoulder to shoulder, people standing there giving support, and it was fundraisers, and we called it the Truth Tour. We were out telling people, here's what's really going on in the United States House of Representatives, and here's what you can expect going forward as we do that. And Matt was very, very clear with everybody that he had ulterior motives in traveling around the state with me. He was still out there trying to rally the support and convince me to file for this United States Senate seat. So we're getting much closer to making our final decision, Vince,
okay.
I will tell you.
If you do that, do you think you'll get a full-throated Trump endorsement?
One never knows. I certainly would be honored to have the president's endorsement, as I have always stood by him and his policies.
Yeah.
So,
We'll see. We'll see. So what's the timeline for an announcement, do you think, on something like that?
So the Secretary of State in Montana does not close the window until March the 11th, but we'll certainly have our decision made before that.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll be looking for that. In the meantime, this bill just is maddening, Congressman. And I'm glad to hear it's dead on arrival in the House. Do you get the sense that the House is pretty unified on this?
I think so. When we see that Speaker Johnson, the Majority Leader Scalise have come out, many of our members have. So a very, very broad spectrum, if you will, of the Republican conference has already come out and condemned it. Look, Ray Charles can see the problems with this bill, okay?
Yeah, for sure. He definitely could. All right, Congressman Matt Rosendale, it is always so nice to have you on. I really appreciate your time today and your assessment of what's going on inside the halls of Congress. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thanks for all the good work you do, keeping folks informed, Vince.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Good to talk to you today. Yeah,
goodbye.
It's amazing. It's amazing what we're seeing here, and we're only scratching the surface. I'm telling you, I can't even get to all of the stuff in this bill that again is billed as DOA in the House. In fact, about that, Mike Johnson, the Speaker, was on Meet the Press this weekend, with the host now, Kristen Welker, is now the host of Meet the Press. They change it every few months. And this is the conversation they were having.
But let me ask you about Donald Trump. He said
Of course, it's all about Trump. It's just about, how can we tie this to Trump? How can we make Trump look bad? Of course, Biden's been president for 3 years, and the border is open because of him.
About Donald Trump. He said any Republican who votes for this deal should be ashamed of themselves.
For sure.
You've said you speak to him frequently and that you've discussed this deal with him, quote, at length. Is Donald Trump calling the shots here, Mr. Speaker?
Of course not. He's not calling the shots. I am calling the shots for the House. That's our responsibility. And I have been saying this far longer than President Trump has. I have been saying what the requirements are to fix the problem. I don't care if they call the legislation H.R. 2 or not. What we're saying is you have to stem the flow. The president has executive authority right now.
This is it. That's the whole point. He's got the authority.
As Congress does this negotiation and the debate and discussion, the president could stop it. Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, the Supreme Court has already acknowledged, gives the president broad executive authority.
Yeah, but you get a dozen Republicans who hit their head and they're like, we should give Biden more authority and shut the border down. And you're like, wait a second. He has authority. What are you doing? You're playing into a stupid political talking point that the left is trying to wield to suggest that the crisis is the product of not having enough laws because of Republicans. You morons. Or maybe you're just doing it maybe it's even worse than that. Maybe you're just not morons. Maybe you're straight up nefarious. You want Biden to win. Maybe the whole game plan is just like, yeah, sure, it's Republicans' fault that the border is open. Oh, we need new laws to give the president authority. We don't need a single law. We don't need a single law. Biden just doesn't want it. Biden has actively opened our borders. And also, one obvious point, let me add among the many obvious points we're making today, that if you were to give Biden sweeping new authorities and the intent was to secure the border, what happens if he says no? What happens if he's like, nah, I don't really want to? What would the world look like if he did that? Oh, it would look like exactly what we're dealing with right now. You idiots. You gremlins. It's so crazy what we're dealing with. A lot of calls coming in today on an important issue. Our country's sovereignty being sold out by our ruling class. Mark is in Virginia Beach today, line 1. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hello, Vince. Mark Gonzalez. How are you? So I want to give the American people a couple of numbers that you're not hearing much of in this bill. This bill is going to allow 4,000 people per day minimum. That equates to 28,000 people a month. That equates to 1.44 million people a year. Now, here's the kicker. Somebody's making money off of this, and it's the coyotes, it's the drug cartel, to the tune between $2.88 and $4.88 billion a year. Is that what we're going to do? We're going to allow criminals to make money off of something that we should have shut down when Trump was in office? Send the U.S. military down to the border as soon as whoever's elected, shut the border down.
Yes, that's exactly right. We need a new president for that, but you're totally right about that. And yes, the cartels have never been richer. In fact, they make more money human trafficking than they do through the sale of drugs, and they're doing both. They're doing both right now at the expense of our country.
Hey, Vince, the next time you talk to a politician, Republican, Democrat, I don't care, ask them what's the dollar value that America is allowing to go south because of the coyotes. They're making at least $2,000 to $4,000 a person that they get to the border.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a massive amount.
So
it's a massive amount.
I'd love for somebody to answer that question.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mark. Yeah, occasionally we get these cost estimates of what this is all costing the American taxpayer. It's immense. The billions upon billions of dollars that are flowing out. And, of course, the cartels being dramatically enriched by the Biden administration. Mark makes a bunch of very important points today. And you know who else is being enriched by this, too? The bill includes stipulations that all of these illegals will be given attorneys. So we're going to have to pay lawyers for foreign nationals who are invading the country. Isn't that great? What a nice thing. Again, it is dead on arrival in the House, is what Mike Johnson is saying. But boy, this thing deserves the scrutiny that it was hoping to avoid, and we are giving it that today. Coming up, the Center for Immigration Studies, Andrew Arthur, will join us in the next hour. We'll talk about some of the details here, what Washington is really up to. And Mark Morgan, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, will join us in the 5 o'clock hour. You don't want to miss it. And I've got some updates for you on what Joe Biden is doing or not doing, what Donald Trump would like to do this weekend in particular during the Super Bowl, and so much more.